The brilliant morning light of San Francisco streamed through the bay window. Melissa Wilson leaned against the kitchen counter, holding a thin slip of paper in both hands, smiling. It showed a positive result on a pregnancy test. After 3 years of marriage, a new life had finally taken root between her and James. "Aren't you overthinking this?" "We haven't confirmed it with a doctor yet," James said. James wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. The scent of shampoo from his still pajama-clad body enveloped Melissa. "But I've taken 3 tests. They were all positive." Melissa turned around and gazed into her husband's blue eyes. "It's our baby, James." Melissa ran a respected interior design firm in San Francisco. Her sense of style and business acumen had earned her industry recognition, and homes and offices designed by Wilson Interiors were regularly featured in magazines. She had been hoping for a pregnancy while immersed in her work but had started to give up just before this happened. "Have you told your mother and sister?" James asked. He worked as an architect and had met Melissa through work. "Not yet. I'm going to Rachel's wedding this weekend, so I'll tell them then," Melissa said, her voice slightly hesitant. "But honestly, I'm a bit nervous about how they'll react." Rachel, Melissa's sister, was her opposite. With her sociable and flamboyant personality, she had built a successful career at a marketing company. A month ago, she had announced her engagement to David Brown, the heir to a major real estate company. "They're bound to be happy," James said gently. "Your sister's wedding and your pregnancy. That's a double blessing for your family." Melissa nodded silently, but complex feelings lurked in her heart. It had been 10 years since her father Thomas passed away. Since then, her relationship with her mother Carol and sister Rachel had been superficially harmonious but somehow distant. Carol, in particular, often displayed different attitudes toward her 2 daughters while playing the role of the perfect mother. "Mother will probably say, 'I can finally see my grandchild's face,'" Melissa said with a hint of sarcasm. "And then she'll continue, 'Rachel should have children soon too.' It just means she values family." James always had a way of interpreting things positively. "Come on, let's have breakfast. You need nutrition for 2 now." After breakfast, Melissa headed to her home office. She had several video conferences with clients today and a pile of work to finish before the weekend wedding. Sitting at her desk, before opening her computer, she picked up her phone. There was a message from her sister. "Sis, you'll definitely make it by Saturday, right? I need to finalize the rehearsal dinner details. Mom's looking forward to it too." Melissa took a deep breath and replied, "Of course. James and I will arrive Friday evening. I have some good news too." After hitting send, she regretted it a little. Perhaps she shouldn't have mentioned the pregnancy yet. It might not be appropriate to draw attention to herself with her news on Rachel's special day. But a reply came immediately. "News? I'm curious. Can't wait to see you." Melissa smiled. Though her relationship with her sister was sometimes complicated, the bond from childhood had never disappeared. This weekend, the whole family would gather for the first time in a while. While believing it would be a wonderful reunion, Melissa couldn't deny the anxiety lurking in the depths of her heart. She gently placed her hand on her abdomen and spoke to the still invisible little life, "Everyone in the family will welcome you." Friday evening, Melissa and James parked their car on the grounds of her family home in the Boston suburbs. The grand New England-style mansion exuded dignity in the soft evening light. After her father's death, Carol had continued living alone in this large house. "Nervous?" James asked as he turned off the engine. "A little," Melissa answered honestly. "But it's my sister's important day. I'm an adult, so I should handle it well." The front door opened, and Rachel rushed out. Her golden hair gleamed in the sunset, accentuating her beauty. She opened her arms and embraced Melissa. "Finally, you're here. Everyone's already gathered. David's parents are here too." Melissa returned her sister's embrace. Rachel, as always, was wearing strong perfume. Congratulations, Rachel. David is a wonderful person. Yes, he really is, Rachel laughed and greeted James too. What's that news you mentioned? That's for later, Melissa smiled. Today is your day. Inside the house, a large group had already gathered in the living room. David Brown and his parents, several relatives, and friends who would serve as bridesmaids were chatting with glasses in hand. On the opposite side of the room stood Mother Carol, dressed in an elegant gown. Melissa, welcome, Carol smiled and kissed her daughter's cheek. James, you look well too. Carol's attitude was outwardly warm, but Melissa couldn't help feeling something beneath the surface. Since childhood, her mother had always shown special affection for Rachel. This tendency seemed to have strengthened especially after their father's death. Everyone, let's begin the rehearsal dinner, Carol announced. We've prepared the garden terrace. On the garden terrace, a long table had been set up, beautifully decorated with candles and flowers. Family and friends took their seats under the twilight sky, and gentle conversation began. Melissa and James sat next to David's parents. Will the wedding ceremony be held here tomorrow? James asked the Browns. No, at St. Mary's Church, Mrs. Brown answered. From our son's birth to his baptism, and now his marriage, everything has taken place in that church. As conversation flowed, Melissa occasionally felt the nausea typical of early pregnancy. However, she maintained her smile while trying not to let it show. David carried himself with the dignity of heir to a major real estate company while interacting with everyone in a gentle manner. His relationship with Rachel was filled with love, and every time they looked at each other, their eyes shone with happiness. Let's toast, David's father stood up and raised his glass. To our children's future and the bond between our two families. Everyone raised their glasses. Melissa picked up her wine glass but only smiled without taking a sip. James squeezed her knee under the table and gave a small nod. Their secret remained theirs alone for a little while longer. Dinner proceeded in a pleasant atmosphere, and Melissa enjoyed the time with her family after so long. However, as the meal ended and dessert was being served, she noticed Rachel and her mother standing up and moving to the edge of the terrace. The two seemed to be engaged in serious conversation. Driven by curiosity, Melissa excused herself saying she needed some fresh air, and approached the terrace railing. As the night breeze pleasantly caressed her cheeks, she overheard part of her mother and sister's conversation. Everything is fully prepared for tomorrow, Carol's voice had a hint of anxiety. Are you sure about this? Don't worry, Mom, Rachel's voice was lower than usual and resolute. I'll handle Melissa. And even if things don't go well, we should be able to avoid the worst-case scenario. As Melissa approached, the two suddenly stopped talking. Her mother turned around, surprised, and put on a fake smile. Oh, Melissa. How was the dessert? I haven't had it yet, Melissa answered, observing the two. What were you talking about? A secret. Just final wedding checks, Rachel laughed. A bride's nerves are quite something. As if to change the subject, Rachel took Melissa's arm and began leading her back to the table. So, what's your news? Melissa hesitated for a moment. Her intuition told her this wasn't the right timing. Well, our company secured a major project. We've been entrusted with designing a new hotel chain in Los Angeles. That's wonderful. Rachel hugged her sister's shoulders. Always the hard worker. But remember, it's important to take breaks sometimes too. As the night wore on, Melissa began to feel a headache and nausea. She spoke to James and decided to retire early. On her way to the guest room upstairs, she stopped by the kitchen for some water. Opening the kitchen door, she saw her mother standing in front of the counter, hastily pushing something into a drawer. Carol turned around, startled, and smiled unnaturally. Melissa, do you need something? I wanted some water, Melissa answered, puzzled by her mother's strange behavior. What were you? Just medicine, Carol said quickly. When you get older, you need all sorts of medications. Melissa poured herself a glass of water and decided to believe her mother's explanation. With the wedding tomorrow, everyone was probably tense. She finished her water, said goodnight, and returned to her room. Lying in bed, James turned toward her. "Are you okay?" "I feel a bit sick," Melissa answered honestly. And also. Mother and Rachel seemed to be hiding something. When they were talking on the terrace, they quickly changed the subject when I approached. And in the kitchen, Mother seemed to be hiding something. James gently stroked his wife's hair. "Everyone's just nervous with the pre-wedding stress. It's a life-changing event for Rachel, and your mother must be tense too." "I suppose so," Melissa said, though anxiety still swirled within her. However, her husband's words reassured her a little, and she closed her eyes in his arms. The wedding day dawned with brilliant sunshine, as if heaven itself was blessing the occasion. Morning light reflected through the stained glass of St. Mary's Church, casting colorful patterns on the floor. Melissa was arranging Rachel's hair in the bridal suite. Each time her fingers slid a hairpin into her sister's golden hair, Rachel trembled slightly. "Nervous?" Melissa asked gently. "A little," Rachel's voice was higher and thinner than usual. "But I truly love David. I know this is the right choice." Melissa looked at her sister's face in the mirror. Rachel's beauty shone especially bright today. Her lace wedding dress enhanced her skin tone, and her blue eyes, inherited from their mother, held a light of mixed expectation and anxiety. "I hope you'll always be happy too," Rachel suddenly said. There was a strange earnestness in her words, almost like a farewell. "Of course," Melissa answered with a smile. "We'll each follow our own paths, but we'll always be sisters." The door opened, and Mother Carol entered. She was dressed in a pale blue gown with a pearl necklace passed down from previous generations around her neck. "Are you ready?" Carol's voice restrained emotion, but her eyes seemed to be hiding something. "The Brown family is already seated." Rachel and Melissa stood up and made their final checks. The bridesmaids gathered in the waiting room, each wearing a pale pink dress and holding a small bouquet. Melissa arranged Rachel's train and lowered her veil. "You're beautiful," Melissa said sincerely. The church organ began to play, and the solemn sound of the wedding march echoed throughout the building. The bridesmaids proceeded one by one, and Melissa, with pride as the bride's sister, slowly walked down the aisle. James sat in the front row and smiled at her. Finally, Rachel entered on Carol's arm. The entrance with the mother replacing the absent father touched the hearts of the audience. David's face showed pure joy, and when Rachel stood beside him, they briefly held hands. The ceremony proceeded solemnly. Vows were exchanged, rings were swapped, and eventually, the pastor declared, "You may now kiss the bride." As their lips met, applause echoed throughout the church. While Melissa's heart was filled with genuine feelings of blessing, she was troubled by the slight nausea and headache that had persisted since morning. Although she knew these were early pregnancy symptoms, she didn't want to fall ill on this important day. After the ceremony, the party headed to the reception at Carol's mansion. The garden was decorated with flowers and white cloth, and a small orchestra played elegant music. Melissa and James sat at the table prepared for them, waiting for the toast. "How are you feeling?" James asked quietly. "I'm fine," Melissa smiled, though her condition was actually gradually worsening. "I just won't drink any champagne. I plan to go to the bathroom after the speeches." Melissa picked up the glass of water placed beside her and took a sip. The cold water moistened her throat, providing temporary relief. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "Melissa." Opening her eyes, she saw Rachel standing in front of the table. She had already changed into a different dress for the reception and was holding a champagne bottle. Behind her stood their mother Carol, and both shared a strange tension. "Congratulations, Rachel," Melissa stood up, intending to embrace her sister. But Rachel raised the bottle, about to pour into Melissa's glass. "Drink plenty today, big sister." Rachel's voice had a different resonance than usual. She smirked while exchanging glances with her mother. That smile concealed a shadowy side unknown to Melissa. Confused, Melissa answered politely, "I've had quite enough to drink, so I can't have any more." In reality, she had barely drunk anything, but considering her pregnancy, she should avoid alcohol. At that moment, James stood up and took the champagne glass. "Then I'll toast in your place," James said with a laugh and emptied the glass that Rachel had filled in one go. In that instant, Melissa sensed something change in her mother and sister's expressions. The glasses in their hands trembled, and the color drained from their faces. Rachel's blue eyes widened in fear, and Carol's lips turned white and tightened. "What's wrong?" Melissa looked at them. "Are you feeling ill?" "And no, it's nothing," Carol hurriedly answered, grabbing Rachel's arm. "We're just a bit overwhelmed with emotion." While puzzled, Melissa didn't want to ruin her sister's happy day. She smiled and returned to the table. However, James's expression began to show signs of distress. Sweat appeared on his forehead, and his face gradually turned pale. "James." Melissa placed her hand on her husband's shoulder with concern. "Are you all right?" "Just my stomach." James stammered, painfully clutching his abdomen. His breathing became rough, and an expression of agony spread across his face. "Water, I need water." Melissa cried out frantically. A waiter rushed over and offered a glass of water, but James couldn't even take it. He suddenly stood up and leaned against the edge of the table. "Call an ambulance." Melissa's voice echoed across the garden. Disturbance spread among the guests, and the music stopped. David quickly approached and supported James. "Are you all right?" "What happened?" "I don't know," Melissa answered, her voice on the verge of tears. "He suddenly fell ill." Rachel and her mother stood at a distance, watching the situation with rigid expressions. An unspoken tension hung between them. James's condition deteriorated rapidly. He collapsed to the floor and began convulsing. Melissa knelt beside her husband and held his hand. "James, please, stay with me." Her voice trembled with sobs. "Help is coming, just hold on." In the distance, sirens could be heard. An ambulance arrived, and paramedics gathered around James. They quickly placed him on a stretcher and attached various medical devices. "Are you his wife?" one of the paramedics asked Melissa. "Yes," she answered with a trembling voice. "I'm coming with you." Before getting into the ambulance, Melissa looked back, searching for Rachel and her mother. They were standing away from the guests, appearing to be arguing intensely. Rachel's beautiful face was distorted with fear and regret, and Carol was gripping her daughter's arm firmly. "Something's wrong," Melissa thought to herself. "They know something." The ambulance doors closed, and the sirens wailed again. Melissa held James's hand tightly and looked at his pale face. "You'll be all right, darling," she whispered. "I'll protect you." The ambulance rapidly departed from the mansion. Confusion and fear swirled in Melissa's heart, but at the same time, a conviction began to grow that something was happening, and it wasn't mere coincidence. With James's life in danger, she needed to know the truth. As the scenery flowed past the ambulance window, one determination solidified in Melissa's heart: find the truth and protect James. And she also had to protect the life that had just begun growing in her womb. Under the cold fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor, Melissa sank into a hard plastic chair in the waiting room. 3 hours had passed since James was taken to the emergency room, and all she could do during that time was pray. The events at the wedding kept replaying in her mind: Rachel and her mother's strange behavior, the champagne glass, and their terrified expressions. "Mrs. Morris?" A doctor in a white coat stood before her. Melissa quickly stood up. "It's Wilson. I'm James Wilson's wife." "How is he?" The doctor's expression was grave, and concern colored his eyes. "Your husband is stable. However, his symptoms don't match typical food poisoning or infection. We're waiting for blood test results, but we're also conducting toxicology tests." "Toxins?" Melissa's voice trembled. What do you mean? Your husband's symptoms are similar to reactions seen in certain poison ingestions. Do you recall anything unusual? Excessive medication or alcohol, or perhaps? The doctor continued, choosing his words carefully, the possibility that he was intentionally given harmful substances? In Melissa's mind, all the pieces suddenly connected. Rachel's whine, the exchange of glances with their mother, and their expressions of fear. That frozen reaction when James emptied the glass in her place. Please contact the police, Melissa said with a shaking voice. Something is wrong. At my sister's wedding, something in the champagne glass. The doctor nodded and instructed a nurse. Soon after, 2 police officers arrived at the hospital. Melissa explained the situation in detail and described her mother and sister's suspicious behavior. I was supposed to drink that, she said tearfully. But Suddenly, she choked on her words. She hadn't yet announced her pregnancy. And in that moment, an even more terrifying truth dawned on her. If her mother and sister had tried to make her drink something, what was their purpose? I'm pregnant, Melissa turned to the nurse. Please help my husband and our baby, both of them. The nurse nodded gently. I'll inform the attending physician. Don't worry. One of the police officers asked while taking notes, so you're pregnant. Did your family know about this? No, Melissa shook her head. We were planning to tell them this weekend. After the wedding. The second police officer received a phone call and, after a brief conversation, turned to Melissa. The test results from the wine glass residue are in. A drug that could potentially induce miscarriage has been detected. The color drained from Melissa's face. Induce a miscarriage. But why? At that moment, the hospital doors opened, and Rachel entered. She was still wearing her wedding reception dress, but her hair was disheveled, and her makeup was smeared. Her eyes were red as if she had been crying, and her expression showed deep guilt. Sister. Rachel's voice was faltering. I'm so sorry, we didn't mean for this to. A police officer stood in front of her. Ms. Rachel Brown? We have some questions for you. Rachel nodded, trembling, and sent a pleading look to Melissa, but Melissa just stared at her sister with cold eyes. Why? Melissa's voice was low and controlled. Why would you do this? Rachel collapsed into a chair and covered her face with both hands. Dad's will. She said faintly. Mom found it 2 months ago. Will. Melissa was confused. Father's will was fully disclosed and processed. Rachel shook her head. There was a hidden supplementary clause among Dad's old papers. It stated that. She choked on her words, the majority of the Morris family fortune would be inherited by the first to bear a child. Melissa was speechless with shock. She never knew such a clause existed in her father's will, who had passed away 10 years ago. And how did her mother and sister know she was pregnant? You knew about my pregnancy? Melissa demanded. How? Rachel averted her eyes. The day of the rehearsal dinner, I found a pregnancy test in your bag. Mom went through your belongings. She swallowed her words. You snooped, Melissa said coldly. And then tried to cause a miscarriage. Rachel nodded slightly. It was Mom's idea, we needed the funds, and for the marriage with David. Her voice trailed off. But we never meant to hurt James, we never intended for him to drink it. The police officer stepped forward again. This confession is being recorded. Where is Carol Morris now? At home, Rachel answered with a trembling voice. David knows everything and announced the dissolution, we lost everything in the middle of the wedding. David said he doesn't want anything to do with me. At that moment, a nurse entered the waiting room. Mrs. Wilson, your husband has regained consciousness. According to the doctor, the treatment is working. Melissa sighed in relief. The worst seemed to have been avoided. She stood up to follow the nurse but turned back one last time and gave Rachel a cold look. I will never forgive you. Or Mother. Our family is over. Sitting beside the bed where James lay, Melissa gazed at her husband's pale face. An 4 was connected to his arm, and a monitor displayed his regular heartbeat. His eyes slowly opened, and a vague gaze was directed at Melissa. Mel. His voice was hoarse. What? It's okay, Melissa gently held his hand. You're going to be all right. Our baby is safe too. Relief colored James's eyes. He smiled faintly and closed his eyes again. In the hallway, police officers continued questioning Rachel, while other officers were heading to arrest Carol. Melissa's illusion of a happy family had crumbled, replaced by betrayal and sadness. But there was still hope. James would survive, and their baby was protected. Melissa gently placed her hand on her abdomen. We'll create a new family, she whispered softly. A family based on true love. 1 year later, San Francisco was bathed in spring sunshine. Melissa sat on a bench in a small park, gently rocking the stroller of her 4-month-old daughter, Olivia. Olivia's blue eyes, inherited from her father, watched the surrounding flowers with a curious gaze. Daddy will be here soon, Melissa smiled, talking to her daughter. Today is a special day. James could be seen approaching from a distance, holding a bunch of small balloons in one hand. His pace was a bit slower than before, but his recovery journey was progressing well. Though the poison had temporarily put his life at risk, thanks to his strong will and cutting-edge medical care, he had regained his daily routine without major after-effects. Sorry I'm late, James said, catching his breath. There was a line at the balloon vendor. He kissed Olivia's forehead and put his arm around Melissa's shoulders. They had become a real family. As a result of the trial, Mother Carol and Rachel received suspended guilty verdicts. Melissa ceased all contact with them and legally resolved the execution of her father's will. What was unexpected was that her father's estate was indeed inherited by her. The price of betrayal was too great for Rachel and her mother. I received a letter from Rachel this morning, Melissa said quietly. Feeling James's expression cloud, she continued, she apologized. It seems she and David have completely separated. Are you going to write back? James asked cautiously. Melissa exhaled softly. I don't know yet. I can forgive, but I can't forget. Over this past year, Melissa had reconsidered the meaning of family. She realized that blood ties alone don't define family, it's love, trust, and the will to protect each other that form true bonds. She was now beginning to write a new family story with James and Olivia. The new project for Wilson Interiors has been officially decided, James changed the subject. He had returned to his architectural work and was facing his job while co-parenting with Melissa. That's wonderful, Melissa smiled. Our company is doing well too. We're welcoming a new designer next month. They stood up and began walking along the park path, pushing the stroller. Today was perfect weather for Olivia's first picnic. The pain of the past hadn't completely disappeared, but with each hurdle they overcame, their bond grew stronger. Our family is special, Melissa said, looking at Olivia. I want you to grow up in an environment filled with love. James embraced his wife's shoulder and nodded quietly. They knew a long road lay ahead, but they had the strength to walk it together. A true family stays close and supports each other even through difficulties. Melissa, James, and Olivia continued walking toward the future, carrying this truth in their hearts.